Aviva and Matan, thank you both for being with us today. It's incredibly meaningful for us to gather as a JDCA community, as we did in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, many times since, and again today, because we are still reeling from the horrific attacks of 1 year ago. Today, we are mourning those lost, and we recommit yet again to the immediate release of the hostages still in captivity, which no one can speak to better than you, Aviva, as a former hostage yourself. I know you're still fighting for the release of your beloved husband, Keith, and you, Matan, as the head of the forum. So, Matan, we'll start with you. After October 7th, you and your wife, Bar, began working with the hostage families to advocate for the release of the hostages. JDCA has also supported the work of the forum, meeting with hostage families and hosting numerous events to bring attention to this issue and call for the immediate release of the hostages. Now that it has been 1 year since these efforts began, and there's still 101 hostages in Gaza, please tell us what we can all be doing to ensure their immediate release. Matan.
Thank you, Haley. So first, I would like to say and start by saying that it's really heartwarming to see everyone kind of like joining and taking the time for this call. We really have true champions here. The Congress members who joined, they are our like closest allies, and this is a great opportunity to thank each one of you for doing what you're doing, because I cannot even express enough how important your work is. So thank you, and Aviva, who is always bringing her light everywhere since she was released, and been advocating everywhere relentlessly since like literally since the day she was released, doing everything she could in order to bring Keith back. So this is I would just like to acknowledge that. The past year was not easy, to say the least, and of course that for the families it was just literally living in hell, not anything else, living in this like parallel universe, weird limbo. I would say that most of them, they say that it feels as if it was one long day since October 7, and here we are a year later. And to be honest, for all of us, it feels like our sisters and brothers, and we're hopeful that they will be released soon. As for your question, what can you do, right? Like that was the question. What can you do? Yes. I would say to be very, very direct about the only way to bring the hostages back home, which is to reach a deal. It's a deal with the devil. It's a deal with the people that we really don't want to do anything with, especially negotiate with. But this is the only way to bring their loved ones home and our brother and sisters home. And if I know that the JDCA community has been extremely supportive, but I feel that if the community will keep echoing this message, will come to our rallies, will join forces, and won't forget about the hostages, this will do the work, and we will bring them home.
Thank you, Matan. Well, after the horrific execution of 6 hostages, including Israeli-American Hirsch Goldberg Poland, calls have mounted for a ceasefire deal, for some sort of deal that ensures the release of the hostages. Yet today, in a month and 1 week later, we still don't have a deal. What is the state currently of these efforts to reach an agreement that will ensure the release of all of the hostages? What is the state of this right now?
Yes. So as you know, all of you, Israel is dealing with many different challenges these days, not only from the Gaza front, also from Lebanon, and we're well cognizant of that, and of course that the IDF is doing the most important work in protecting all of us. However, I would say that the current situation and the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East delays the negotiations on the deal. In one way or another, it is an obstacle in the way. And right now, the negotiations are not really underway. They're like kind of, we're waiting. The families are waiting as well. Maybe Aviva later on could elaborate on that, but we really need to shift our focus and refocus on the hostages and bringing them back as part of the resolution of the escalating situation in the Middle East. Because without the hostages being back home, the future of the Middle East is at risk. And this is a key factor in ensuring that Israel is safe, that the Middle East is a better place to live in, and that we as a community, as society, are united and staying together.
Matan, you had said in your answer about what we can all do is to also join the forum, to join you, to join your efforts. Can you briefly describe those efforts, including what you're doing around this solemn day of October 7th?
Definitely. So in the past year, the Hostage Families Forum team has been working around the world, not necessarily here in the US, also in Europe, in Israel, of course, really trying to provide the best and the most effective platform for the hostages to advocate for their loved ones. And it includes so many different arenas that we work in, and Aviva can testify that she also, as one representing an American citizen that is held captive, she has been she talked and met with literally everybody. Okay, so from the administration to Congress to the international community, trying to bring different embassies, different countries together to support to support the release of the hostages, to say that it's anti-Muslim to hold hostages, senior people, babies, women. We've been working tirelessly with media and press to keep it top of mind, to make sure people are not forgetting. And you know how hard it is these days, now, especially with election coming soon. Our main effort is that people will not forget, that people will push their Congress members, will push the administration, will make everything possible to really, to encourage them also to seal the deal and bring them home. So, and on that day, on October 7, we have several events held across, like actually around the world, and especially here in the US. We're gonna have we have events in almost every city across the country. So I'm sure that I assume that many of you are connected with the federations at your hometown. Please reach out to them. We're taking part in this in many places. Hostage families, they're traveling in order to participate, to take part, to be heard. Please go there, join virtually. Make sure that they see you, because you don't understand how much it re-energizes them, how much and power give all of them. So Thank you again for being with us in this
Matan,
day.
thank you for your work. Thank you for the work of the forum. Aviva, we now want to hear from you. And I know today must be a very difficult day for you personally. And I just want you to know that our hearts are with you. We stand with you. We have more than 1,000 people on this call right now who are literally with you. And we want to hear about your reflections on this day and what has occurred over the course of the past year for you.
Well, today, I just want to cry, but I've been crying for the last 10 months. And it's just the worst thing and the cruelest thing to think that Keith, 65 years old, is underneath the ground now. And I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know if he's losing hope or he feels forgotten, how thin he is, if he's injured, if he's sick. I don't know anything about Keith, and it's just too much for me to handle. And I do know that I'm trying to do everything I can to bring all the hostages back. I was with some of the girls that are still there, and I saw everything. I felt everything, and I'm still feeling. I'm there, still in Gaza, feeling exactly what the hostages are feeling. And I think that leaving them there is the most cruelest thing that human beings can do, knowing what they're going through. If the hostages did not come back and nobody knew what they're going through, I would say, okay, so it can take a year and we can think maybe that they're okay. But knowing how bad everything is there, by me talking and feeling, by what happened with the 6 hostages, Hirsch, that came back dead in bad conditions, they lost half of their body weight. And they were just in a terrible place. And I can't even imagine Keith in a place like that. But I do know that it could be like that because I was there. I was there underneath the ground trying to figure out if I'm going to live. And luckily I'm sitting here next to you and talking to you. But I feel like I'm very lucky, but I'm so unlucky to know what Keith is going through and the hostages are going through. So this year has been a very difficult year for me. It started with me being in Gaza for 51 days, and it's been continuing, being the worst time of my life. All I want to do is to get dressed like an Arab and to go into Gaza and look for Keith, because it's just too much for me to handle.
I think it is important for us to hear more about your experience. Before everyone else joined, you said to ask anything. So if you don't mind, are you able to tell us more about your experience? You are one of those who has experienced being in the tunnels. You experienced it. We're so glad that you were released in November. But can you talk about what the hostages may be going through because of your experience, you know?
Keith and I were taken underneath the ground, and we walked and walked and walked and walked 40 meters underneath the ground while we arrived to a little arch that's open and felt like we don't have any oxygen. 2 terrorists stayed with us, and they were with us just for 2 hours and just left us there. And we just left there without no food and hardly any water to drink. At some stage, Keith looked at me and he said that he feels that he can't breathe. So I said, Keith, just lie down and try and breathe. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to say in words what it makes you feel. But I felt like I'm going to die. We were lying on filthy, dirty mattress underneath the ground with no oxygen. And the feeling that we had is that we're going to die. And all I prayed for is that I die before Keith. And when we came out of the tunnel, I'll never forget that moment of standing and breathing. For the first time, it felt like I was born. I was born again. And then nobody told us that they're going to take us to these terrible, terrible monsters Hamas terrorists that treated us like dirt, starved us while they ate in front of us. One of the days, after 20 hours of not getting food, the girl that was with us asked, when are we going to get some food? And the terrorists just looked at us without a blink and said, it takes a long time to make food. After 24 hours, we got a half a pita that was dry from a couple of days ago. And I just want to say that the most hardest things for me was when they tortured Keith and they tortured the girls and beaten them. One of the girls, after coming back from the bathroom, told me that she was touched. And then she had to play this game that nothing happened. She had to smile and show everybody that nothing happened, that she's okay. Well, nothing was okay because she was scared of him, because he said, if you tell anybody, I will kill you. And the other girl that was taken away into the next room, and she was beaten up into pieces with a stick, with guns. And when she came back, she was shaking. Her hair was standing. She was red. And I could not even get up and give her a hug, even though I felt that she was my child. I just had to close myself down and not even say a word, because I wasn't allowed to. We had to say all the time, tamam, that's okay in Arabic. Well, nothing was okay. And when they tortured Keith and took him into the bathroom and shaved his whole body, and when he came out, they just stood and laughed at him while I wanted to cry and he wanted to cry. I wanted to cry so many times after being tortured while lying at night and it's dark. They brought a torch into my eyes to see if I'm awake, and then started laughing because I didn't move, even though they knew that I was awake. And I do not know why they did that. If they wanted to do it, maybe to take me and rape me. And I do know that Keith and the girls and the boys that are there, that are underneath the ground, are just trying to survive, just like I did. There wasn't 1 minute that I could just relax my body. My body was so sore, and Keith's body was so sore. Keith was with his ribs broken because they broke his ribs. And his back was caught, and they didn't let us move and stand. They didn't let us talk. Can you figure out what it means sitting for 7 weeks and 2 days and keeping quiet, not talking? The only happy moments that we had sometimes when they locked us, and they locked us in a very small room, and then we could talk. But that feeling of being locked, that you don't know if you'll ever get out of that room, and then unlock the room, was terrible. So when Keith went to the bathroom, I used to say, Keith, you've got 1 second, because I was scared that something would happen to him. I used to look at the ceiling that moved every time, because in every place we were, the missiles that came out from Gaza came out of that building or that house, and the house shaked. I used to count the cracks and just pray that nothing will happen to Keith. I got to the stage that I used to keep and hide pieces of pita for Keith in a piece of tissue underneath my mattress. But Keith said, I'm not going to eat them because you're losing weight. So he didn't. And I didn't, because I wanted Keith to lose weight, to eat them. And when the Hamas terrorists came and did a video of me and Keith, I remember saying to Keith, Keith, I feel like I'm going to cry, because that's what I felt. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, Aviva, you stay strong for your children, for your family. They don't want to see you upset. And when the video was released of Keith in April, I didn't see it. I could not see the sadness in Keith's eyes. But Keith was crying and he was begging. So I'm sure you understand what that means. He's begging and crying. He's 65 years old. He's praying to go back to North Carolina and hug his mom that's 97 and waiting for him. And I just can't believe it that Keith is underneath the ground and forgotten what the moon, what the sun looks like and feels like. Because that's a long, long time. I was there for 51 days and Keith is there 7 times more than me. And I went through hell. I lost 10 kilos. And I came back sick.
Well, you have been incredibly strong today, Aviva, telling us all the story. And we all also now are looking at Keith and you and thinking about your strength. What message would you like us all to have? There are more than 1,000 people on this call, including members of Congress who we'll hear from next. What is your message to all of us? What do you want us to know and to do to ensure that Keith and the other 100 come home?
My message is that Keith and the hostages are underneath the ground and they know and waiting for the next terrible thing that's going to happen to them. If they're going to be raped again, touched, starved, threatened, thirsty, or without any oxygen, and they're praying to get out of there. So we all need to be their voices and shout that in our world, as humans that have hearts, we cannot allow them to stay there. We just can't. It's the cruelest thing that could ever happen to anybody. Being in a situation like that, I know exactly what it feels. You feel like you're going to die because you're threatened all the time with a gun in front of your face for 24 hours a day. So I'm praying that they'll get out of there. And I want to ask you all to do everything you can to help get them out. Because what we're all doing doesn't seem like it's working. But I'm not going to lose my hope. I'm talking for the girls, and I'm talking for Keith and the boys. I'm screaming. And we need help. It can't be in 2024 that the evil is winning. It just can't be. There has to be a solution. We can't let this happen. We can't let Hamas terrorists win. We just can't. So we need to get together and find a way to be stronger than Hamas and get them out of there.
Thank you, Aviva. We will try to channel your strength. You have really demonstrated such amazing strength for the past year, including for the past 20 minutes even on this call. We are so grateful for you and bringing your voice and your story and your situation, including with Keith, to all of us today. We will never forget it. Believe me, nobody is forgotten. We will never forget your story, and we are going to do everything we can to ensure Keith's release. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for everything that you're doing for us. We really, really need you. So I want to thank everybody that's seeing me, because I know that you're with us. And I just want to tell Biden that I love him. He gave his heart to me. And it was very, very special. I want Keith to meet him too. I'm trying.
We are.
Every minute, every second that I have.
We are too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aviva. I will now turn things over to our chair, Ron Klein, to lead our discussion with members of Congress, including fellow Floridian Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. Ron, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Haley. And Aviva, there's not much to say to follow your explanation of what you've been going through, what your husband's been going through, and you are representative of all of the hostages and the hostage families and what they've been going through. But to hear the particulars and the specifics just reminds us of the commitment that we all have to follow through on your request, that we stay vigilant and keep pushing. We're very privileged today to have 4 members of Congress who are representative of a whole lot of other members of Congress who have been taking up the lead on this issue and are going to talk to us today a little bit about that. And so why don't we take this part of the conversation in the direction of what can be done, what should be done. Start out with Congressman Wasserman Schultz, fellow Floridian. Hope you and your family are okay with the storm coming, as an aside. But you've been one of the people, and I've known you for so many years, who have taken up the needs and the interest of Israel and the Jewish community. This, of course, at this moment, this is unprecedented, what we're all going through and what Israelis are going through and families are going through, but Jews throughout the world in their empathy and support. You've led congressional efforts advocating for the release of the hostages, among others, which we at JDCA have also strongly, vocally, and persistently have said the same thing. Talk to us about what have these efforts looked like over the past year, and how are you continuing to advocate as we enter the second year?
Ron, thank you, and thank you to JDCA for bringing us together on this incredibly difficult day. And I don't know if Aviva is still on, but I have gotten to know her over the course of this year and been with her really in so many different places in my district, in Israel, in the Middle East, in Washington. I've heard her pain and her talk about what Haley asked her about, which was so critically important for the people on this call to hear. It is so easy over time as time goes by, for the whole plight of the hostages to be sanitized. And as humans, we all do our best to compartmentalize the pain and the agony of hearing the cruelty and the evil that these hostages are experiencing. And what has been critical, and what Aviva just did in such a compelling way, was really bring us into those tunnels and in the midst of that torture. And that is what I and my colleagues, Kathy and Brad, who are on this call with us today, and so many other colleagues of ours, and Hilly Stevens as well, talk about a righteous Gentile. I mean, my gosh, thank you, Haley. We have done everything we can and continue to use every medium possible to make sure that people don't move on, that they don't allow the hostages to be forgotten. I remember when I was a kid, how the Iran hostage crisis, if you remember that, I mean, that was even more days and years than what the Israeli hostages are living through now. And that's what happens, is that the news moves on, the people move on, they start going on with their lives. So from the least important, which is to keep, as I know the members here have done, and I have on my door, all of the pictures of the hostages, signs that say we stand with Israel on the front doors of our offices in the Capitol, making sure that we do use every possible communication messaging effort, keeping the plight of the hostages at the forefront of the conversation, making sure that every opportunity we have to meet with them, hear their stories, lift them up, hold press conferences, make sure that we used the floor of the House of Representatives as a world stage to shine a white hot spotlight on who they are, that these are human beings, that there are young girls who are being victimized, that there are people who are being brutally beaten. The idea that they're underground and have no oxygen. A few weeks ago, when Hirsch, Goldberg, Poland, and the other 5 hostages that were imminently going to be rescued, and they were murdered in cold blood to prevent their release and their rescue, making sure that we use the very significant platforms that we have, Ron, to keep the spotlight and the attention on that the hostages are still there. And then also on top of that, using our role as members of Congress and the incredibly important bilateral relationship that we have with Israel. I have been to Israel, including when I was there in the region over that weekend. And then we went into Israel as a bipartisan, bicameral congressional delegation on October 10th, meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and hostage families right from those first days, coming back to Israel multiple times after that, to talk about making sure that we keep getting their release at the top of the priority list, organizing special order hours and making sure that we can encourage our other colleagues, because it can't just be important to Jews. We have to make sure that whether you are Jewish or whether you represent a Jewish community and are not Jewish yourself, or whether you are not, you're in neither category, that there are American hostages there. That is something that we've had to stress, that 40 Americans were killed on October 7th. People forget about that. That's not really mentioned nearly as often as it should be. And towards the end of the session, before we went into recess for the October break, I organized a letter and urged my colleagues to make sure before, as the October 7th anniversary today approached, that they use the opportunity to communicate about the necessity of releasing the hostages and commemorating October 7th, and ensuring, lastly, I think the most important thing I can say, beyond just the incredibly important plight of the hostages, is that this terrorist threat on Israel's doorstep has to be brought to an end. This can never be allowed to happen again. And while there is a humanitarian crisis, it is one that is whose fault lies at the feet of Hamas and Iran, and no country should have to face a 7-front war. And I'm very proud of our president and vice president who are backing up Israel with actions and not just words.
And on that point, and we're just going to have to make this real quick because I know we have 3 other of your colleagues that have some things to say as well. That's okay. No, thank you for everything you said. It's just so heartfelt and connects with all of us. The president and vice president Harris have really stood by Israel without question. Obviously, the situation has intensified since Iran shot 200 ballistic missiles. And of course, the United States defended along with Israeli defense forces. Can you just talk for a second about how the Biden administration has supported Israel in this latest attack?
Yes. I mean, not just in April 2024, when Biden and Harris ordered a U.S. defense equities to work with Israel in preventing the 300 missiles, drones, and rockets that were fired then, but now sending U.S. naval destroyers that worked with Israeli air defense units to shoot down the 200 ballistic missiles and prevented them from reaching their intended civilian targets. Biden and Harris were the first administration to ever order the U.S. military to defend Israel from an attack by Iran, and now they've done that twice. So look, what is really important for all of us listening to this gathering today is that we make sure that we underscore, particularly to our pro-Israel Jewish community. I talk to my Jewish, pro-Israel constituents about this all the time, is that, you can't just listen to the rhetoric that is coming from the other side. Talk is cheap. We have gone through in the last year, time after time, where Republicans have politicized Israel, thrown obstacles in the path of getting Israel the resources that she needed. And on the flip side of that, every time that Israel has needed the United States to step up, we have. And that, for anyone that doubts where the vice president is, she has very clearly said in remarks after the attack that the U.S. will never hesitate to take whatever action is necessary to defend U.S. forces and interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists, and that we will continue to work with our allies and partners to disrupt Iran's aggressive behavior and hold them accountable. You can take that to the bank. The actions matter, and the talk is cheap. And we've got to make sure that pro-Israel voters understand that if they want to ensure the U.S.-Israel relationship remains as strong as possible, and that Israel has the United States behind her and has a president and vice president who have their back, they need to vote for the Democratic ticket.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We appreciate your words, and actions speak louder than words. And you're obviously someone who both says it and does it as well. So thank you for speaking up and being part of the leadership team that has been led by President Biden and Vice President Harris. We're going to shift over to Congresswoman Kathy Manning, a good friend of ours from North Carolina, who has a special connection, of course, as we just heard with Aviva and the family. But we're going to shift over to a related topic, if we can, Congresswoman, and that is you have, throughout your career before Congress and certainly during Congress, really taken on the issue of anti-Semitism. You've been a leader, you've been a partner to organizations like us, but with the administration, this unprecedented administration action against anti-Semites and institutional anti-Semitism. Talk to us a little bit about the strategy, the national strategy that comes under the Biden-Harris administration, and about the government's ability to fight it. Obviously, anti-Semitism has been around forever, and we as Jews, it's in our DNA. We know what we have to fight back on, but you've been a leader, so please talk to us for a couple minutes about that.
Thank you so much, Ron. Let me just start by sending my love to Aviva Siegel, and please know, Aviva, my prayers are with your husband, and I'm hoping for his speedy relief. And I also just want to say to my congressional colleagues on this call, I could not have gotten through this past year without all of you. We have come together in ways that I don't think any of us imagined we would, just like our entire national American Jewish community has come together. So thank you for being this close group of colleagues in Congress. So our efforts to combat anti-Semitism began long before October 7th. I was lucky to take over as chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force to combat anti-Semitism when Ted Deutsch left Congress in late 2022. And we asked President Biden to put together an interagency task force to determine how best to counter anti-Semitism. The Biden-Harris administration, not even 6 months later, introduced the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. It is a very comprehensive document. It has timelines, it has more than 60 to-do items, and it has accountability. And so I worked with my team, the ADL, the AJC, to put together a bill that took everything in that U.S. national strategy that was assigned to Congress, and the Countering Anti-Semitism Act is the result of all of that work. I'll just give you the highlights of that bill. It puts in place the structures for our government to actually combat anti-Semitism, not just to drag college presidents in to berate them in hearings, but actually puts the structure in place to do the hard work to counter anti-Semitism. First, it creates a national coordinator in the White House who would oversee every federal agency that is tasked with countering anti-Semitism. It would hold them accountable, and it would coordinate their efforts. It would put into place a senior level official in the Department of Education to report directly to the Secretary of Education, whose job it would be to make sure that educators and administrators understand their obligations to keep Jewish students safe, to go after those who are discriminating against not just Jewish students, also Jewish professors. That person would evaluate what is working to combat anti-Semitism in our K through 12 schools and our colleges. That person would make sure that students are aware of how to file claims of discrimination, and it would make sure that the Office of Civil Rights it is currently doing everything it can to investigate and settle claims. They need more funding, more resources to do that, and having a person tasked with that at the very top of the org chart would be so helpful. The bill would also implement far more Holocaust education. It would look at what school districts across the country are actually educating students and their teachers about Holocaust education, what's working, what is not working, how we can create better tools, and also to help everyone understand that teaching about the Holocaust is not just about anti-Semitism, it's also about what happens when people stand by silently and allow discrimination to take place against any group. The bill would also include more funding for Homeland Security grants. Those are the highlights of the Countering Anti-Semitism Act. It currently has 32 Republican co-sponsors, 32 Democratic co-sponsors, and I've got about 40 Democrats on the list to become sponsors, but I've told them they each have to bring a Republican along with them because we want the bill to be bipartisan. Now, the biggest challenge we face is that Speaker Johnson will not bring that bill to the floor for a vote, and the committee chairs who are supposed to look at different parts of that bill won't even bring the bill to their different committees. The speaker does not have to let it go to committee. He can just bring the bill to the floor for a vote. So I would ask all of you on this call your members of Congress and ask them why Speaker Johnson is not taking serious action to counter anti-Semitism and bring the Countering Anti-Semitism bill to the floor. Let me just add one last thing. In the Foreign Affairs Committee, just before we left Congress, I was able to get a resolution through the Foreign Affairs Committee to adopt and implement the new global guidelines to counter anti-Semitism. That's something that Deborah Lipstadt worked so hard to get more than 40 countries and organizations to sign on to. We need this adopted throughout the world, countries around the world. So I guess I'll stop there. I put a lot on the plate. There's so much that people on this call can do to fight against anti-Semitism. As I said, encourage your members of Congress to get that Countering Anti-Semitism Act to the House floor. Speak to chancellors at your local universities to find out what they're doing. But also, we need to come together as a community and make sure that even though we disagree on so many issues, we can find appropriate ways to speak out against anti-Semitism, to educate others as to why it matters, to build our alliances, and to take solace that our government actually wants to fight anti-Semitism, contrary to what governments throughout the ages have done who actually fostered anti-Semitism.
Wonderful. Kathy, or Councilwoman Manning, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Just wonderful hearing those words from you. I mean, it's inspirational. We all know and feel the effects of anti-Semitism, whether it's remotely or in other places. But the effort of the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, and you and others have taken the substance of it and really doing something, not just to talk about it. This has been talked about in the past, and it's politicized again as a ridiculous thing. This is a very serious issue, and it's just. The Jewish community knows we are the canary in the coal mine in terms of hate. That's the history of things. So we just need to fight, and thank you for your leadership. And we know you'll continue on in many ways in the future and continue to work on this issue and many others.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we're going to Congressman Brad Schneider in Chicago. I happen to be in Chicago today, so nice to be in your hometown. But thank you for your leadership on foreign affairs, and so many things are important to Israel and the Jewish community. I'm going to ask you some questions specifically about what has happened, both militarily and otherwise. Obviously, as we know, Israel successfully eliminated Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the Iran-backed terrorist organization Hezbollah, who was responsible for killing not only Israelis, but Americans and Lebanese and people throughout the world. This is going on for over 3 decades. And of course, they were part of the Hamas war against Israel following the attack. As Vice President Harris said, and JDCA echoed, Nasrallah, quote, destabilized the Middle East, and now Hezbollah's victims have a measure of justice. A mere few days after the strike, Iran retaliated by launching hundreds of ballistic missiles against Israel, which were fortunately neutralized, most of them neutralized by IDF and with support of the United States. Talk to us about what are the implications of Nasrallah's death in the Middle East, and how do you anticipate the growing direct conflict between Israel and Iran to reshape the region? Obviously, a lot of players there. And how does this impact the hostage deal that we've been talking about?
Well, Ron, thanks for the question. Before I respond, I want to join all my colleagues. I've had the chance to meet with Aviva, Siegel, and other families of the American hostage. And I think one thing we all saw with Aviva is her love for her husband. And that love gives us all strength. She has been an incredible person, and we stand united with her in praying for Keith's swift return, as well as the other 101 hostages, as soon as possible. Nasrallah's death is a significant moment. It has to be put in the broader context of literally the entire leadership of Hezbollah has now been wiped out. Also, it's important to note that Israel's actions against Hezbollah were precipitated by Hezbollah's actions supporting Hamas on October 8th. Hamas launched thousands of rockets on October 7th, exactly a year ago today. And the next day, Hezbollah started firing rockets into northern Israel. More than 60,000 people have been evacuated from the communities in Israel, and a comparable number evacuated from Lebanese communities because of Hezbollah. Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, the militias all share one thing in common, and that's their patronage by Iran. Iran is at the center of all of this. I think the actions of Israel over the last 6 weeks have been extraordinary and has changed the dynamic and the strategic calculus in the region. Iran a year ago had what was being called strategic depth with its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., and that is no longer the case. Iran, for the first time this year, twice in less than a year, has launched missiles, rockets, and drones against Israel. Thankfully, with the support of the United States, the leadership of President Biden, as well as other allies in the region and around the world, Israel has twice defeated those attacks. And there's no question that Israel must respond in like measure and kind to the attacks from Iran. What we've seen is Iran doesn't have the reach that we may have initially presumed that it has. But we know that Iran is seeking a nuclear weapon, and the United States policy is and must remain to prevent Iran from ever having that nuclear weapon. Because God forbid Iran was a nuclear power today, it'd be a very different strategic situation in the region and around the world. So I think the implications of Nasrallah's death, to your question, are significant in the fact that Hezbollah, the threat's not eliminated by any measure. They still have thousands of rockets they can fire at Israel, thousands of troops, war-trained, battle-hardened troops to fight Israel, but the calculus certainly has changed. You're still on mute, Ron. Murphy's Law.
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, just the last question, just to tie up the hostage conversation we were having earlier. How does this impact a hostage deal? I mean, obviously things have sort of stalled. Talk to us for a second about how you feel that all these other activities and challenges will affect the release of the hostages.
Well, I think the hostage deal still is critically important. We need to bring these people home. 367 days is 360 days too many for these people to be in Gaza. There's talk of pressuring the Israelis. I think that is the wrong way of looking at it. We need to support the Israelis and give them the confidence to make hard choices, to make a deal with the devil. But the pressure needs to be on Hamas and Sinwar. Pressure needs to be on the patrons of Hamas, specifically Iran. And that's the way a deal is going to be achieved. We've been close. I think the pace of operations in Gaza has been diminished for a number of months now. But the threat still remains. Rockets were fired today from Gaza, threatening Israel. These are not rockets meant to be fireworks in the sky, but they're meant to kill Israelis. And as long as that threat remains, Israel must remain vigilant, and the United States must remain allied with our partner our most important strategic partner in the region.
Thank you, Congressman. Very, very important message and strong words for the necessary support that our administration has provided to Israel and giving it the support, both tangible and otherwise, to accomplish and to defend itself, of course. We're going to move over to Congresswoman Hilly Stevens, and we thank you. This is an opportunity for us to hear a little bit about Michigan and what's going on there. Obviously, this since October 7th, there's been a lot of conversation. There's a large Palestinian population in the state of Michigan, Muslim populations, and they've been vocal from time to time, and certainly have tried to voice their political views. Not happy, and no, they're not moving over to Donald Trump, certainly, based on his comments being pretty outrageous overall. But just tell us, what have you found effective when talking to Jewish voters about how Democrats have supported Israel and the reaction of the Jewish community since October 7th?
Well, Ron, it's a true honor to be on this Zoom, and over 1,000 people who have joined us and are still on, and of course to hear from one of our country's heroes, Aviva Siegel, and how remarkable she is in sharing her journey and the ongoing horror that her husband Keith is experiencing. I think all of us as members of Congress have taken Aviva, into our hearts and into our homes. I cheer her on when I see her, because I just find her so magnificent. And of course to JDCA, that isn't totally a new organization still, but under 10 years and really serving a profound purpose each and every election. And of course to my colleagues and Michigan's hometown daughter, Kathy Manning, whose parents I boast as constituents, and other family members. She's still very much remembered here fondly, and keeps up and his sleeves rolled up in terms of the political work here, just as Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Brad Schneider have always been very dedicated to Michigan. And Brad, I think we're seeing you here soon. So I'm just going to be honest with you, Ron. I think there's a tremendous amount of misaligned attention being placed on a small and vocal group here in Michigan. And over and over and over again, over this last year, our Jewish community has just been so ignored, and in Michigan in particular, and forgotten in national interviews and in conversations, particularly as we got closer to the presidential primary in February. I think one day I just kind of snapped, because every time I got pulled aside by a reporter or was on a national interview, the questions always focused on the Muslim community and the Arab community. And it was always on me to say, we have a Jewish community that's in a lot of pain. And I just think that today is such an open wound that's still going on. Our federation was attacked this morning. Jewish homes had just like rat poison left on their doorsteps. These are all places in my district. And we have 3 state house and state senators who are Jewish, and the way they're treated is terrible. So I know I'm with a bunch of family, and I'm not normally like an emotional person in public, and I've really kept it together this last year alongside my colleagues. But it's just, if we can't even take today to remember what happened to 46 Americans who were murdered, 9 who were taken hostage, Hirsch, who was murdered before our very eyes, along with 5 others. Your organization serves such a profound role in that way. And I'm using my position to just be as clear as possible with everybody. And that wins the day. clarity, transparency, firmness around the issues, and the vibrancy that is still alive and well here in our Jewish community, who I'm in awe of, but you just can't ignore the pain. And to come through this weekend that we had, I mean, with individual homes being targeted, with our federation being defaced, with individuals saying just unbelievable anti-Semitic things. And these are not even people who are making the national news. So, you know, I know love is louder. October also marks the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre. And that was a rallying call for us. And I know tonight we're all going to be together in remembrance, in grief, frankly, around this open wound and around the lives that were lost. And I believe that those who are standing alongside humanity, standing alongside democracy, standing alongside our democratic values, you know, when Kamala Harris came to Michigan right after the murder of Hersh Goldberg Poland, I had a chance to greet her at the airport. And that was the first thing I said to her. And she was all over it. She was all over it. And she had just left the Situation Room. So I'm looking out at Brad and Debbie and Kathy, and I just want to give everyone a big hug. But it's a hard time for our Jewish community in Michigan right now.
Well, Congresswoman, that is certainly a telling way to wrap up the contributions that each of the four of you made to this conversation today. Aviva led us off with her personal experience and what she and her family, her husband obviously, have been going through. It sort of really got to us emotionally, and now we've heard substantively. Each of you has said something to add to why October 7th was so important and what the ramifications and the impacts have been, including all the way through Congresswoman Stevens' points on the election and what every community has been through. And by the way, this is not just about the Jewish community. There's so many other communities that are impacted by this kind of lack of respect and behavior in this country right now due to political posturing and dangerous rhetoric and things like that in our own country, let alone what's going on in Israel. But
we're still keeping interfaith dialogue open in Michigan, Ron.
As you should. That's wonderful.
You know, and that's what I'm getting at. I mean, it's like this minority of voices that is anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and they somehow seem to speak for a whole group of people. And that's just not the case. And our Jewish community just needs to know that the Democratic Party is standing by them. You saw this at the DNC. You see this in the overwhelming swath of our elected representation. And, you know, we're a party that supports you know, the incredible diversity and tapestry that exists in America, and we're also standing by a democratic ally in Israel. So that's going to continue to win the day for us.
It does, and you know, just simply, I mean, if you think about why is the fact that 90% of Jewish members of Congress are Democrats? It's not an accident. I mean, it's because the alignment of interests on Israel, anti-Semitism, and a whole lot of domestic issues which our Jewish community really cares about. We care about democracy, and we know what happens when democracy turns on us. We care about access to education and healthcare and abortion rights and guns. We're on the right side of these issues because they're American issues, and we feel strongly about it. So again, we want to thank all of you for your leadership. Aviva, thank you again for being with us today. I'm going to turn it over to Bobby Saferstein for closing remarks.
Before you do, Ron, can I just say,
of course,
how deeply I appreciate, and I'm sure I speak for Brad and Kathy, Hilly Stevens. Hilly, we love you. And you've stepped up every single time when we've needed people to rally with us. You've never hesitated. And I am just so proud to be your friend. Thank you.
Let me add, Haley represents the district where I grew up. We went to the same high school. So you do us all proud, Haley.
And I echo all of that. We love you, Haley, and thank you all for doing this. And I apologize, I need to run.
Haley, do you want to tell how much you love everybody else too?
It's a love fest.
And with that love fest, I'm going to turn over to Bobby. Bobby?
Thank you, Ron, and thanks to everyone. We need all the love we can get, and we can create that together. So I just want to thank Aviva, I want to thank Matan, Congresswomen Manning, Stevens, and Wasserman Schultz, Congressman Schneider, and to each of you for joining us today. My name is Bobby Saperstein. I'm JDCA's Chief Program Officer, and it's difficult, it's heartbreaking, it's unfathomable that we're still at this point 1 year later. How is it possible that every hostage is not home, that the war isn't over? We shouldn't be here, and yet we are. With so much brokenness around us and solutions seeming as elusive as ever, it's easy to feel hopeless. But in times like this, when so much is out of our control, we do as the Jewish people have done for centuries, that which we have done today, what we're doing right now. We come together to find strength in each other and take collective action on what we can control. And right now, for the next 29 days, that means doing everything we can to win on November 5th. Because the best possible way forward for the United States, for Israel, and for the entire region is making sure Vice President Kamala Harris and Democrats who share our Jewish and democratic values are elected. So to learn more about all the ways you can join the Jewish Democratic Council of America, including participating in our phone banks, our text banks, canvases, and upcoming programs like this, please visit jewishdems.org/do-something. We also invite you to join us next Monday, October 14th at 12 p.m. Eastern for our Jewish Conservatives for Kamala virtual conversation with former George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush administration officials, Dr. Elliot Cohn and Bill Kristol. You can sign up at the link in the chat. 1 year ago today, or rather 1 year ago, during our first community conversation on the crisis in Israel, I closed with the following three prayers. Today, as we mark the 1 year anniversary of October 7th, I invite you to join in with me once again. We mourn all those lost by saying Baruch